Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will discover timeless Buddhist tales that have been nourishing souls for over 2,000 years. Each story designed to guide you toward the profound rest and clarity your heart has been seeking. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a carefully chosen collection of ancient stories that hold the hidden keys to inner freedom and the deepest peace your soul can know. Each tale carries within it the power to transform how you see yourself, your struggles, and the very nature of lasting happiness. Don't be deceived. These are no ordinary tales. They're timeless teachings from enlightened masters who discovered something most of us have lost. That true peace and rest come not from perfecting our external world, but from understanding the eternal wisdom that already lives within our souls. As the great Zen master Huang Po once said, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Tonight, you'll experience exactly how these profound insights can awaken a new understanding within you. As we journey through these remarkable tales together, you'll notice something beautiful begin to unfold. The weight you've been carrying will start to feel lighter. The endless questions that keep your mind spinning will begin to find their answers. You'll discover yourself naturally returning to the deep, unshakable peace that has always been your true nature. So settle in deeply now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive teachings that your soul has been waiting to remember since the very beginning. A wandering monk was walking through a peaceful field, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face and the gentle rustling of grass in the breeze. His mind was calm, focused on the beauty of the present moment, as he had trained himself to be through years of meditation practice. Suddenly, the tranquil silence was shattered by a ferocious roar. A massive tiger emerged from the tall grass, its golden eyes fixed upon him with predatory intensity. The monk's heart raced as he turned and fled, his robes billowing behind him as the tiger gave chase. His feet pounded against the earth as he ran desperately toward the edge of a high cliff. With no other path available and the tiger closing in behind him, he spotted a thick vine hanging over the precipice. Without hesitation, he grabbed hold of it and swung himself down over the edge, just as the tiger reached the cliff's edge and snarled from above. As he dangled there, suspended between earth and sky, the monk looked down and felt his heart sink. Far below, another tiger paced hungrily at the bottom of the cliff, waiting for him to fall. He was completely trapped. The tiger above could reach him if he climbed up, and the tiger below would devour him if he fell. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed two mice, one white and one black, scurrying out from a crevice in the cliff face. Together, they began to gnaw on the very vine that held his life. He watched them work, knowing that at any moment the vine would snap. His situation was utterly hopeless, with danger at every turn and time quickly running out. It was at that precise moment, as he accepted the complete impossibility of his predicament, that he noticed something extraordinary. Growing from a small ledge just within his reach was a single, perfect wild strawberry. Its red skin glistened in the sunlight, and it looked plump and delicious. Holding the vine with one hand, he gently plucked the strawberry with the other. He brought it to his lips, and as the mice continued to chew through the vine above him, he savored the fruit completely. It was the sweetest strawberry he had ever tasted. The Buddha once said, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound truth about the nature of consciousness and our relationship to circumstances beyond our control. The deeper teaching here reveals that life perpetually places us between tigers, the regrets and wounds of our past above us, and the fears and anxieties of our future below. The white and black mice represent the endless cycle of days and nights, constantly gnawing away at the vine of our existence. Yet even in this precarious position, suspended between dangers we cannot escape, moments of pure sweetness remain available to us. Why do we find it so difficult to taste the strawberry when tigers surround us? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned habit of projecting ourselves into past regrets or future fears, missing the immediate reality of what is actually happening now. When we're consumed with what was or what might be, we become blind to the present moment's offerings. This pattern reveals itself constantly in modern life. During a stressful work presentation, we might miss the support in a colleague's encouraging smile. While worrying about finances, we overlook the warmth of our morning coffee. In the midst of relationship conflict, we fail to notice a moment of unexpected tenderness. The strawberries are always there, but our minds are elsewhere. Consider how often throughout your day you find yourself suspended between tigers. Perhaps it's the anxiety of an upcoming medical appointment while simultaneously replaying yesterday's argument with a family member. Or the stress of work deadlines combined with worries about aging parents. In these moments, what strawberries might you be missing? The sound of rain against your window, the comfort of a warm sweater, the simple miracle of your breath flowing in and out. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh spoke of this when he said, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The very transience that makes our situation precarious, the gnawing mice, the waiting tigers, also makes each moment precious and unique. The strawberry's sweetness is intensified by the brevity of the experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called strawberry mind, the capacity to fully receive whatever sweetness is available, even when surrounded by difficulty. This doesn't mean denying our challenges or pretending everything is fine. Rather, it means developing the ability to hold both realities simultaneously, acknowledging our vulnerable position while remaining open to unexpected gifts. The Buddha taught, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." When we observe our experience closely, we discover that even in our most difficult moments, elements of beauty, connection, and wonder continue to present themselves. Tonight, as you reflect on the challenges that feel like tigers in your life, can you also notice what strawberries are within reach? Perhaps it's the softness of your pillow, the quiet of the evening, or simply the remarkable fact that you're alive to experience this moment at all. As the Buddha reminded us, every morning we are born again. What we do today matters most. Each moment offers a new strawberry, waiting to be savored. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the burdens we carry in our minds. Two Zen monks, Tanzan and Ekido, were traveling together along a country road after several days of heavy spring rain. The path they followed was one they had walked many times before, but today it was transformed into a muddy, treacherous route filled with deep puddles and slippery patches that made walking both difficult and uncomfortable. Tanzan was an elder monk, advanced in both age and spiritual development, known for his practical wisdom and natural ease with whatever circumstances he encountered. His companion, Ekido, was younger and still working to understand the finer points of monastic discipline and Buddhist practice. Ekido took great pride in following the rules precisely and was particularly concerned with maintaining the strict behavioral codes that governed interactions between monks and lay people. As they rounded a bend in the muddy road, they came upon a beautiful young woman dressed in an elegant silk kimono. She stood at the edge of a particularly large and deep puddle, clearly unable to cross without ruining her expensive clothing and delicate footwear. The woman looked distressed and uncertain, glancing back and forth between the muddy water and the path she needed to follow. Buddhist monastic rules strictly prohibited monks from having physical contact with women, especially young and attractive ones. This prohibition was designed to help monks maintain their vows of celibacy and avoid situations that might lead to temptation or scandal. Ekido was well aware of these rules and expected that he and his companion would need to find a way around the woman or wait for her to solve her problem independently. But without a moment's hesitation, the elder monk Tanzan approached the woman with a gentle smile. Recognizing her predicament and moved by natural compassion, he spoke to her kindly. "Please allow me to help you across this difficult passage," he said with respectful courtesy. Before Ekido could object or even fully process what was happening, Tanzan had carefully lifted the woman in his arms and carried her across the muddy intersection, setting her down gently on the dry ground on the other side. He bowed politely to her, and she thanked him graciously before continuing on her way. The two monks then resumed their own journey, walking side by side as they had before. But now, there was a tension in the air that hadn't existed earlier. Ekido was deeply troubled by what he had witnessed, but he maintained silence out of respect for his elder companion's seniority and reputation for wisdom. As they walked, Ekido's mind raced with confused thoughts and judgments. How could such an advanced practitioner so blatantly violate one of the fundamental rules of monastic conduct? What if other people had seen this inappropriate contact? How could he reconcile his respect for Tanzan with this apparent breach of Buddhist discipline? The monks continued their journey for several hours, covering many miles of terrain as they made their way toward their destination. Throughout this time, Ekido's agitation continued to build. He found himself unable to focus on the natural beauty around them or engage in the mindful walking that was normally an integral part of their travels. As the sun began to set and they neared the monastery where they planned to spend the night, Ekido could no longer contain his confusion and distress. The question that had been burning in his mind all afternoon finally burst forth. "We monks are not supposed to go near women," he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion, "especially young and lovely ones like the one we encountered today. It is dangerous and against our rules. Why did you do that? How could you carry her when you know it violates our monastic principles?" Tanzan looked at his agitated companion with patient understanding, recognizing the mental suffering that his younger brother had been carrying throughout their journey. His response was simple and direct. "I left the woman there at the roadside," he said gently. "Are you still carrying her?" Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. Here we discover a teaching about the mental burdens we create and carry long after the original situation has passed. This tale unveils a profound truth about the difference between responding to immediate circumstances with compassion and creating ongoing mental suffering through judgment and rumination. Tanzan's action was motivated by simple kindness. He saw someone in need and responded naturally without attachment to rigid rules or concern about appearances. Ekido's response, while understandable from the perspective of monastic discipline, created hours of mental agitation and suffering. He transformed a brief moment of helpful action into an extended internal drama about rules, propriety, and spiritual correctness. In trying to protect the purity of their practice, he contaminated his own mind with judgment and anxiety. Why do we find it so difficult to let go of experiences that have already ended? The mind has a tendency to replay events, especially those that trigger our sense of right and wrong, proper and improper, acceptable and unacceptable. We carry these mental recordings around like heavy luggage, reviewing them repeatedly and adding layers of analysis, judgment, and emotional reaction. Tanzan's question, "Are you still carrying her?" points directly to this habit of mental carrying. The physical act of helping the woman lasted only a few moments, but Ekido had been mentally carrying both the woman and his judgments about the encounter for hours. The original situation was long over, but his mind kept it alive through constant mental repetition. This pattern appears constantly in our daily lives. Someone says something that offends us in the morning, and we replay the conversation throughout the day, carrying the irritation and resentment long after the words have been spoken. A mistake we made years ago continues to create shame and self-criticism in the present moment. A worry about tomorrow's meeting prevents us from being present to today's experiences. Consider how much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that have already ended or haven't yet occurred. The argument with your partner last week that you're still processing internally. The presentation next month that you're already rehearsing and worrying about. The criticism you received from a supervisor that continues to replay in your mind days later. In each case, we're like Aikido, carrying something that exists primarily in our thoughts rather than in present reality. The original situation may have been significant and worthy of attention, but our continued mental carrying often creates more suffering than the original event itself. Zen Buddhism distinguishes between appropriate response and excessive mental elaboration. Tanzan responded to what was actually happening in the moment, a person needing help crossing muddy water. He acted with natural compassion, then let the situation go completely. Aikido created an ongoing internal narrative about what had happened, carrying mental burdens that served no useful purpose. This doesn't mean we should never reflect on our experiences or consider the implications of our actions. There's a difference between skillful reflection that leads to insight or appropriate planning, and obsessive mental rehearsal that creates suffering without producing useful results. The teaching points toward developing what might be called carrying discernment, the ability to distinguish between thoughts and concerns that deserve our attention and those that we can safely put down. Some mental carrying is necessary and beneficial. Most of it is optional and burdensome. Tanzen's approach represents the possibility of living with what Zen calls no mind, responding naturally to each situation without creating elaborate mental stories about our responses. He helped the woman because helping was appropriate in that moment, then released the entire experience without self-consciousness or concern about appearances. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." Tanzen's action was motivated by love, compassion for someone in need. Aikido's mental carrying was motivated by hatred, judgment about rule-breaking and impropriety. The love created a moment of assistance, then disappeared. The hatred created hours of internal suffering. What's particularly beautiful about this exchange is how Tanzen's final question served as both teaching and liberation for his younger companion. In pointing out that Aikido was still carrying the woman mentally, he offered him the opportunity to put her down immediately and return to present moment awareness. Sometimes we discover that we've been carrying mental burdens for so long that we've forgotten they're optional. We've become like people walking around with heavy backpacks, completely forgetting that we could simply take them off and set them down. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice what you might be carrying mentally from today's experiences or tomorrow's anticipated challenges. Can you practice Tanzen's approach of responding appropriately to each situation as it arises, then releasing it completely? As the Buddha taught, the secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, worry about the future, or anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is learning the difference between appropriate responsiveness and unnecessary mental carrying, discovering the relief that comes from setting down burdens we never needed to pick up in the first place. Our next story speaks to the moment when understanding transcends effort. This is no water, no moon. The nun Chiono had devoted many years to intensive Zen study and practice. She spent countless hours in meditation, wrestling with profound koans and contemplating the deepest teachings of the Buddha. Her dedication was unwavering. She rose before dawn each day, sat in perfect posture through pain and discomfort, and approached her spiritual practice with the kind of fierce determination that impressed even her teachers. Despite her sincere efforts and obvious commitment, enlightenment continued to elude her. She could understand the concepts intellectually, speak eloquently about emptiness and non-duality, and even guide other students through basic meditation techniques. But the final breakthrough, the direct realization that would transform her understanding completely, remained just beyond her grasp. Years passed this way. Chiono began to feel a growing frustration with her practice. She watched as other students seemed to achieve insights that remained mysterious to her. She questioned her methods, intensified her efforts, and sometimes wondered if she lacked some essential capacity for awakening that others possessed naturally. One night, after a particularly long day of meditation and study, Chiono was walking slowly back to her small quarters. She carried an old wooden water pail that she had filled at the well earlier that evening. The pail was ancient, held together by strips of bamboo that had grown worn and weak with age. It had served faithfully for many years, but she could feel it becoming increasingly fragile in her hands. As she walked through the moonlit courtyard, she became mesmerized by the sight before her. The full moon hung perfectly in the dark sky above, its bright light illuminating the temple grounds with a soft, ethereal glow. But what captured her attention was the reflection of that moon in the water she carried. There, contained within her humble pail, was a perfect, unbroken circle of light, the moon itself, complete and radiant, held in water. She walked carefully, almost reverently, watching this reflected moon dance gently with each step she took. The image was so clear, so perfect, that it seemed as real as the moon in the sky above. For a moment, she felt she was carrying something sacred, transporting this luminous presence from the well to her room. Suddenly, without warning, the aged bamboo strips that held the pail together finally gave way. The bottom of the bucket fell out completely, and all the water rushed to the ground in a single, swift motion. In an instant, the reflection of the moon vanished completely. With no water, there was no moon. At that precise moment, watching the reflected moon disappear as the water hit the earth, Chiyono experienced complete liberation. All her years of seeking, striving, and effort suddenly revealed themselves as unnecessary. The very thing she had been chasing, enlightenment, awakening, understanding, had never been separate from her to begin with. Like the moon's reflection, it had appeared to exist independently, but it was simply the natural expression of what was already present. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual realization often comes not through accumulation, but through release, not through grasping, but through letting go. This ancient tale illuminates a fundamental paradox in all spiritual seeking. We begin the path believing that enlightenment is something we must acquire, achieve, or attain through effort and discipline. We imagine it as a distant goal, a state of consciousness we don't currently possess, but might earn through sufficient practice and dedication. Chiyono's years of sincere effort weren't wasted. They were necessary preparation, like tenderizing the soil before planting seeds. But her breakthrough came precisely when she stopped trying to capture and hold on to spiritual realization, and instead witnessed its natural arising and dissolving. Why do we find it so difficult to recognize what is already present? The seeking mind creates the very separation it hopes to overcome. When we believe that awakening exists out there or in the future, we overlook the awareness that is reading these words right now, the consciousness that experiences thoughts and emotions without being limited by them. Consider how this pattern plays out in your own spiritual life or personal development. Do you sometimes feel like you're chasing insights, trying to grasp peace, or working to achieve a state of mind that seems just beyond reach? The very effort to capture these experiences can prevent us from recognizing that the awareness capable of seeking is already what we're seeking. This doesn't mean abandoning all spiritual practice or personal growth efforts. Chiyono's years of discipline created the conditions for her realization, but it does point toward a different relationship with practice, engaging wholeheartedly while holding the results lightly. like carrying water that might spill at any moment. Zen master Bankei expressed this understanding when he said, "The unborn is the Buddha mind itself. When you have realized this fact, the Buddha mind with which you were born from your mother has done the Buddha's work from the very beginning." What we're seeking in meditation, therapy, or personal growth is the recognition of what was never absent. The water and moon in the story represent the apparent duality between seeker and sought, between the ordinary mind and the awakened mind. As long as we believe these are separate, that the moon exists independently in the water, we try to protect and preserve our spiritual experiences. But when the container breaks, we discover that the separation was illusory. This teaching extends beyond formal spiritual practice into every area of life where we chase happiness, success, or fulfillment, as if these were objects to be acquired rather than expressions of our true nature. The perfect relationship, the ideal job, the peaceful state of mind. These are often reflections we try to capture and hold, not recognizing that their essence is already present in our capacity to appreciate and seek them. In Zen practice, we learn to trust the process of natural unfolding rather than forcing insights or demanding particular experiences. Sometimes the most profound understanding comes when we stop trying so hard to understand, when we let the bottom fall out of our containers and allow our carefully constructed spiritual images to dissolve. The Buddha taught, "The one who has conquered himself is a far greater hero than he who has defeated 1,000 times 1,000 men." The conquest Chiono achieved was not victory over ignorance, but recognition that the battle itself was based on a misunderstanding. Tonight, as you reflect on your own seeking and striving, can you imagine what it might feel like to let the bottom fall out of your spiritual container? What would happen if you stopped trying to capture and hold on to your insights and instead trusted the natural wisdom that already animates your seeking? As the Buddha reminded us, within you there is a stillness and a sanctuary to which you can retreat at any time and be yourself. Perhaps what we're looking for has been looking through our eyes all along. Let us continue our journey with a story about wisdom, acceptance, and the art of timing. This is Ikkyu and the Broken Cup. The young Zen student Ikkyu was known even as a child for his quick wit and profound understanding, qualities that would later make him one of Japan's most revered masters. At the time of our story, he was studying at Ankoku-ji Temple under the guidance of the head priest, a stern but compassionate teacher who valued both discipline and insight in his students. The head priest owned a very precious teacup, an ancient piece of ceramics that had been passed down through generations of temple masters. It was a rare and beautiful work of art, with delicate brushwork and a subtle glaze that seemed to capture light in its depths. The priest treasured this cup above all his other possessions, and he often warned the young students never to touch it, keeping it safely displayed on a high shelf in the main meditation hall. One cold winter day, Ikkyu and his fellow students were playing quietly in the main room while their teacher was away on temple business. The ancient wooden floors creaked softly under their feet, and the late afternoon light filtered through the paper screens, casting long shadows across the tatami mats. In their youthful enthusiasm, The boys were perhaps a bit too energetic in their games. As Ikkyu moved quickly to catch a small ball they were tossing back and forth, he accidentally knocked against the shelf where the precious cup sat. Time seemed to slow as he watched the treasured vessel fall through the air and shatter into several pieces on the stone floor below. The sharp sound of breaking ceramic echoed through the quiet hall like a bell announcing disaster. The other boys froze in terror, their faces pale with fear. They knew well the head priest's attachment to this cup and could already imagine his anger when he discovered what had happened. Some of the younger students began to whisper anxiously about what punishment might await them all. But instead of panicking or trying to hide the evidence, Ikkyu remained remarkably calm. He quietly gathered the broken pieces, carefully examining each fragment before tucking them into the wide sleeve of his robe. Then he called his fellow students to sit with him in meditation posture, asking them to remain peaceful and centered. When they heard the sound of their teacher's footsteps returning to the temple, Ikkyu instructed them to stay exactly where they were. The head priest entered the room and immediately noticed that his prized cup was missing from its usual place. His eyes swept the room, taking in the unusually still and formal posture of his students. Before he could grow angry or begin questioning them, young Ikkyu approached him with a serene expression, his hands respectfully positioned behind his back. "Master," Ikkyu asked with genuine curiosity and respect, "why is it that all things must eventually die?" The head priest, recognizing a sincere spiritual inquiry, set aside his concern about the missing cup and considered the question carefully. "That is the nature of existence itself," he answered gently. "Everything that is born is subject to decay and death. It is the fundamental law of impermanence that governs all phenomena. We must learn to accept this truth if we wish to find peace." At that moment, Ikkyu brought the broken pieces of the teacup from behind his back and presented them to his master with a slight bow. "Master," he said with perfect composure and deep understanding, "it was time for your cup to die." The head priest looked at the shattered fragments, then into the young boy's clear, untroubled eyes. He saw no malice, carelessness, or fear, only a profound acceptance of the very teaching he had just articulated. Instead of becoming angry, a slow smile spread across his weathered face, and he began to laugh softly. As the Buddha observed, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the relationship between wisdom and timing, between understanding impermanence intellectually and embodying it when life demands it. The deeper lesson here illuminates how genuine spiritual understanding transforms our relationship to loss and change. Ikkyu didn't break the cup deliberately, but when the accident occurred, he neither denied the reality nor became paralyzed by fear. Instead, he used the moment as an opportunity to demonstrate and deepen everyone's understanding of a fundamental Buddhist truth. This pattern reveals itself throughout our lives when we cling to objects, relationships, or circumstances as if they were permanent. We invest our sense of security in things that are, by their very nature, temporary. A job position, a home, a relationship, our physical health, our mental clarity. All are subject to the same law of impermanence that governed the priest's precious cup. Why do we struggle so deeply with this obvious truth? Our attachment to permanence serves as a psychological defense against the uncertainty that characterizes existence. We convince ourselves that if we can just control enough variables, maintain our possessions carefully enough, or love deeply enough, we can somehow exempt ourselves and what we cherish from the universal law of change. But Zen Buddhism teaches us that our suffering comes not from impermanence itself, but from our resistance to it. The cup was going to break eventually, perhaps in 10 years, perhaps in 100. Ikkyu's accident simply revealed what was always true. The cup's existence was temporary, and its beauty lay partly in that very transience. Consider how this wisdom applies to your own attachments. That favorite shirt that will eventually wear out, the car that will someday need replacing, the relationships that will change form or end, the abilities and qualities you currently possess that will inevitably diminish with age. Each of these is precious precisely because it is impermanent. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same wisdom Ikkyu demonstrated, accepting what is while remaining open to change and growth. This doesn't mean becoming detached or uncaring. The priest valued his cup and felt its loss, but Ikkyu's response invited him to hold that value within a larger context of understanding. We can love deeply while remembering that all forms are temporary, including the form of our love itself. The Buddha taught, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When the inevitable breakages occur in our lives, the job loss, the diagnosis, the relationship ending, the death of someone dear, we have a choice in how we meet these moments. Tonight, as you consider what you're holding tightly in your life, can you imagine what it might feel like to appreciate these gifts while acknowledging their temporary nature? Can you find the wisdom to say, when the time comes, it was time for this to die, and mean it with the same peaceful acceptance that Ikkyu demonstrated? As the Buddha reminded us, the trouble is, you think you have time. By embracing impermanence now, we discover a freedom that no loss can touch. Our next story reveals a profound lesson about the nature of anger and our projections onto others. A young boatman known for his fiery temper was ferrying his small wooden craft across a wide, misty river in the early morning hours. He took great pride in his navigational skills and the care he brought to his work. But the slightest inconvenience or disruption could send him into a blazing rage. His reputation for explosive anger was well known among the other river workers, who often avoided him during his darker moods. On this particular morning, thick fog had settled over the water, reducing visibility to just a few feet in any direction. The boatman squinted through the grey mist, carefully steering his vessel across the familiar waters. Suddenly, through the swirling fog, he saw another boat moving directly toward him on a collision course. "Hey, turn aside!" he shouted into the mist, his voice echoing across the water. "You're going to hit me! Can't you see where you're going?" But the other boat continued steadily forward, showing no sign of changing direction. The boatman's anger began to build as he shouted again, his voice now filled with fury. He cursed the other pilot's carelessness and incompetence, his rage growing with each passing second. Despite his increasingly angry warnings, the other boat struck his own with a solid, jarring thud. Now boiling with indignation, the boatman was ready to leap into the other vessel and give its foolish pilot a piece of his mind. He prepared himself for a confrontation, ready to unleash all his pent-up frustration on the person who had so carelessly disrupted his morning journey. His fists were clenched, his face red with anger as he moved toward the other boat. But as he peered through the mist at the vessel that had struck him, he discovered something that stopped him completely. The boat was empty. There was no pilot at the tiller, no person to blame or confront. It was simply a drifting boat that had been carried into his path by the river's current. In that instant, his anger vanished completely. It was impossible to be furious at an empty boat. There was no target for his rage, no one to receive his harsh words. All the aggressive energy that had built up inside him suddenly had nowhere to go. He simply pushed the empty vessel away and continued his journey, his mind now as calm as the misty river around him. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how much of our anger is directed at empty boats, projections of intention where none exists. This tale unveils a fundamental truth about the nature of human reactivity. Most of our emotional suffering comes not from what others actually do to us, but from the stories we create about their motivations, intentions, and character. We assume malice where there might be distraction, disrespect where there might be ignorance, and personal attack where there might be simple circumstance. Why do we so readily populate empty boats with imaginary pilots to blame? Our minds evolved to quickly assess threats and assign agency to potentially dangerous situations. This survival mechanism served our ancestors well when distinguishing between a rustling bush caused by wind versus a predator. But in modern social situations, this same tendency leads us to attribute deliberate, harmful intent to actions that may have no such motivation. Think about your daily interactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, do you immediately assume they're inconsiderate and selfish? When a colleague doesn't return your greeting, do you decide they're being rude or dismissive? When a friend cancels plans last minute, do you interpret it as a sign they don't value your friendship? In each case, you may be creating a pilot for an empty boat. The driver who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital with a sick child. Your colleague might be preoccupied with devastating personal news. Your friend might be struggling with anxiety or depression. Most people's actions have far more to do with their internal experience than with any intention to harm you. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we react to our interpretations rather than to what actually happened, we're fighting empty boats. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to set appropriate boundaries. If someone's behavior affects you negatively, you can address it skillfully without creating elaborate stories about their motivations. You can say, "When you interrupted me, I felt unheard," rather than, "You're always so disrespectful and self-centered." The practice involves pausing when anger arises and asking, "Am I reacting to what actually happened, or to the story I'm telling myself about what happened? Am I angry at a person's actions, or at the pilot I've imagined in their empty boat?" In Zen meditation, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions as passing phenomena rather than absolute truths. When anger arises, instead of immediately believing and acting on it, we can notice. Anger is here. What story is my mind creating? What am I assuming about this person's intentions? The Buddha said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Each time we populate an empty boat with a malicious pilot, we create suffering for ourselves. Each time we remember that most boats are simply drifting with the current, we free ourselves from unnecessary reactivity. Tonight, as you reflect on recent moments of frustration or anger, can you identify which boats were truly piloted and which were empty? Can you feel the difference in your body between reacting to harmful intent versus responding to simple circumstance? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. When we stop fighting empty boats, we discover that peace was available all along. Let us now turn to a story about generosity in the face of poverty and the profound recognition of what truly cannot be stolen. This is the moon in the window. Master Ryokan lived in conditions of voluntary simplicity that would have challenged even the most committed ascetic. His small mountain hut contained virtually no possessions, no treasures, no valuable objects, no accumulations of any kind that might tempt a thief or provide security for the future. His few belongings consisted only of the most basic necessities: worn robes, simple eating utensils, and perhaps a book or two for contemplation. On this particular evening, as Master Ryokan rested peacefully in his humble dwelling, a sneak thief approached through the darkness, believing he had found an easy target in what appeared to be an unguarded dwelling. The thief moved carefully, avoiding any sounds that might alert the occupant to his presence, and managed to slip inside the hut undetected. Once inside, however, the burglar quickly discovered the reality of the master's lifestyle. He searched methodically through the small space, examining every corner and crevice where valuables might be hidden, but found absolutely nothing worth stealing. There were no coins, no jewelry, no fine fabrics, no tools of value, nothing that could be easily carried away and converted into money or traded for necessities. The thief stood in the middle of the sparse room, frustrated and disappointed by this complete lack of anything worth taking. He had risked detection and potential punishment for what appeared to be a completely fruitless endeavor. After investing time and effort in this nocturnal enterprise, he was faced with the prospect of returning home empty-handed, with nothing to show for his criminal efforts. Just as the discouraged thief was preparing to leave in defeat, Master Ryokan's voice emerged gently from the darkness. Rather than shouting for help or expressing anger at this intrusion into his privacy, the master spoke with the kind of compassionate concern he might show toward any guest who was experiencing difficulty. "Wait," the master called softly. "Don't leave yet." The thief froze, expecting to be confronted, accused, or perhaps threatened with consequences for his attempted burglary. Instead, he watched in amazement as Master Ryokan quietly rose from his sleeping area and began removing the old cotton-quilted bedclothes that provided his warmth during the cool mountain nights. Without a word of reproach or any indication that he considered this intrusion a violation, the master folded his bedding carefully and offered it to the bewildered thief. "Here," he said simply. "Take this. You've come all this way and deserve something for your trouble." The thief accepted the unexpected gift in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to such extraordinary generosity from someone he had intended to rob. This was unlike any encounter with a victim he had ever experienced. The master's kindness left him speechless and somehow ashamed of his original intentions. As the confused burglar departed with the master's bedding, Master Ryokan stood in his doorway and noticed that the moon had risen over the eastern mountains, casting its serene light across the landscape. The beauty of this sight inspired him to compose a traditional waka poem that captured both his physical situation and his spiritual understanding. Left untouched by the thief in his haste, the moon in the window. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils a teaching about the difference between material wealth and true abundance, and the recognition that our deepest treasures cannot be taken by any external force. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with possession, security, and the fear of loss that dominates so much of human experience. Master Ryokan's response to the thief reveals someone who understood that genuine wealth consists not in what we accumulate, but in our capacity for generosity, compassion, and appreciation of beauty that requires no ownership. The master's immediate impulse to give something to the disappointed thief demonstrates a revolutionary understanding of abundance. Rather than feeling victimized by someone who had tried to take from him, he experienced concern for someone who seemed to be in need. His poverty became a source of generosity rather than a reason for defensiveness or fear. Why do we typically respond to attempted theft with anger, outrage, and desire for punishment rather than compassion for the thief's desperation? This reaction stems from our identification with our possessions as extensions of ourselves, and our belief that being robbed somehow diminishes our worth or security. But Master Ryokan's response suggests a different relationship with material goods, one based on stewardship rather than attachment. His poem about the moon reveals the profound teaching at the heart of this story. The thief could take material objects, but could never steal the master's appreciation of beauty, his capacity for wonder, his ability to find joy in simple, natural phenomena. These internal treasures, peace, contentment, aesthetic sensitivity, remain completely beyond the reach of any external threat. The image of the moon in the window represents all the gifts that life offers freely to anyone with eyes to see them: beauty, mystery, natural wonder, and the kind of wealth that increases rather than decreases when shared. The thief left with fabric that would eventually wear out, but the master retained access to beauty that would never diminish, and joy that no one could take away. This teaching reveals the difference between having and being. Material possessions require constant protection, can be lost or stolen, and often create more anxiety than genuine security. But the qualities of consciousness that Master Ryokan embodied, generosity, peace, appreciation, become stronger through expression rather than weaker through sharing. We can observe similar dynamics in our own relationship with loss and theft. When someone takes something from us, do we focus primarily on what we've lost, or on our capacity to respond with wisdom and compassion? Can we recognize opportunities to practice generosity even in situations that initially seem to call for defensive reactions? The story also points us toward understanding true security. Master Ryokan felt safe not because he had elaborate locks or security systems, but because he had nothing worth stealing in conventional terms and everything worth having in spiritual terms. His security came from inner abundance rather than external accumulation. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-possessive appreciation, the ability to enjoy beauty and goodness without needing to own or control them. When we can appreciate the moon without needing to possess it, we access a form of wealth that no economic conditions can threaten. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that voluntary simplicity means deprivation or sacrifice. But Master Ryokan's story suggests the opposite, that reducing our attachment to material accumulation can actually increase our access to the forms of wealth that truly matter. His poverty became a gateway to generosity rather than a limitation on his capacity to give. The thief's hasty departure suggests that he recognized something in the master's response that challenged his entire framework for understanding value and security. Being met with kindness instead of anger, generosity instead of defensiveness, probably planted seeds that would continue growing long after he left the mountain hut. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the transformative power of unexpected responses. By meeting attempted theft with spontaneous giving, Master Ryokan created a moment of grace that had the potential to change not only the thief's immediate experience, but his entire understanding of human nature and the possibilities for positive interaction. Tonight, as you consider what you most fear losing and what you consider your greatest treasures, can you distinguish between the possessions that can be taken from you and the qualities of awareness that remain completely beyond any external threat? What would it mean to invest more energy in developing the kind of wealth that increases through sharing rather than decreases through loss? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The moon in the window represents the eternal treasures that remain available to anyone who has learned to let go of attachment while remaining open to the beauty and wonder that no thief can ever steal. Let us now turn to a story about authentic communication and the difference between social rituals and genuine inquiry. This is the teaching of the Zen master in the fields and the students' dance. In the early morning hours, when mist still clings to the rice paddies and the air carries the fresh coolness that will soon give way to the day's heat, a Zen master works quietly in the monastery's fields. His movements are unhurried and precise as he tends to the young plants, pulling weeds and adjusting the small channels that direct water through the terraced plots. This manual labor is as much a part of his spiritual practice as formal meditation, each action performed with complete attention and care. Along the path that borders these fields, students begin their daily procession toward the meditation hall for morning sitting practice. They walk in contemplative silence, their minds already turning inward in preparation for the period of formal meditation that will begin their day. The sight of their master working in the fields has become familiar, a reminder that spiritual practice extends far beyond the cushion into every aspect of daily life. As each student passes by the working master, he looks up from his tasks and calls out the same friendly greeting. "Good morning, how are you?" His voice carries genuine warmth and interest, as if he has been waiting specifically for the opportunity to connect with this particular person in this particular moment. Student after student responds with cheerful but automatic replies. "Good, thank you, master," or "very well," or "fine, fine." Their answers come quickly and easily, requiring no thought or self-examination. These are the responses that social convention provides for such moments: pleasant, positive, and designed to keep conversation moving smoothly without creating awkwardness or delay. With each conventional answer, the Zen master sighs quietly and shakes his head with what appears to be disappointment. Yet he continues his pattern, greeting the next passing student with the same question, receiving the same type of response, and expressing the same subtle frustration with the exchange. Finally, one student approaches whose awareness has been sharpened by observing this repeated pattern. When the master calls out his familiar greeting, "Good morning, how are you?" this student pauses instead of offering an immediate reply. He considers the question seriously, as if hearing it for the first time. After a moment of genuine reflection, instead of answering with words, the student removes his hat, turns it around so it sits backward on his head, and performs a small, spontaneous dance, a few steps that express something authentic about his actual state of being in this moment. His response is playful, original, and completely his own. The Zen master's face breaks into a broad smile. "Now that is much better," he exclaims, with obvious delight. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, speak only endearing speech, speech that is welcomed, speech, when it brings no evil to others, is pleasant. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between communication that connects and conversation that merely fills space. Why do we default to automatic responses when asked about our well-being, even by people who might genuinely want to know? Buddhist psychology reveals that most social interactions operate through learned scripts that prioritize efficiency over authenticity. We develop standard replies that require no vulnerability, self-examination, or real presence in order to navigate social expectations quickly and safely. The master's repeated sighs express the spiritual teacher's recognition that these conversational habits reflect deeper patterns of unconscious living. When we answer, "How are you?" without actually checking in with ourselves, we miss opportunities for both self-awareness and genuine connection. We remain strangers to our own experience while presenting pleasant facades to others. The student's creative response demonstrates what Zen calls original mind, consciousness that responds freshly to each situation rather than relying on conditioned patterns. His little dance wasn't elaborate or dramatically expressive, but it emerged from actual awareness of his state in that moment, rather than from social programming. This story addresses the broader question of authenticity in daily communication. How often do we ask questions we don't really want answered? How frequently do we give responses that reveal nothing about our actual experience? These habits create a kind of collective sleepwalking, where everyone participates in conversations that never quite make contact. The Buddha taught about right speech as one of the essential elements of spiritual development. This includes not only avoiding harmful words, but also cultivating communication that serves truth and connection. Right speech emerges naturally when we bring genuine presence to our interactions, rather than operating on autopilot. Consider how your own conversations might change if you treated "How are you?" as a real inquiry requiring honest response. This doesn't mean burdening others with elaborate personal details, but it might mean pausing to actually check your state before answering, allowing something authentic to emerge, rather than defaulting to "fine." The master's work in the fields, while conducting these social experiments, reveals the integration of spiritual practice with ordinary activities. His question wasn't separate from his farming, but another form of cultivation, tending to the quality of human connection just as carefully as he tended the rice plants. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck often spoke about the importance of being present with what is actually happening, rather than with our ideas about what should be happening. The conventional responses to "how are you" often reflect our ideas about what others want to hear, rather than honest awareness of our current experience. The student's dance also demonstrates that authentic expression doesn't require sophisticated language or deep philosophical insights. Sometimes, a simple gesture that arises spontaneously from genuine presence communicates more effectively than elaborate verbal explanations. His backward hat and few dance steps revealed something real about his spirit in that moment. This teaching extends beyond verbal communication to all forms of expression. How often do we present ourselves according to learned templates, rather than allowing our authentic nature to show? Do our clothes express genuine preferences or social conformity? Does our behavior reflect conscious choice or unconscious habit? The master's delight in receiving an original response reveals the joy that emerges when human beings make authentic contact. Despite the simplicity of the exchange, something genuine passed between teacher and student that had been absent from all the previous interactions. This is what Zen calls direct transmission, understanding that moves from one awareness to another without relying on conventional forms. Buddhist meditation teacher Jack Cornfield writes about bringing beginner's mind to familiar experiences. The student who danced demonstrated this principle by treating a routine social question as if he had never heard it before, allowing fresh awareness to shape his response rather than relying on habitual patterns. The deeper invitation here involves developing comfort with not knowing how to respond before our authentic reaction reveals itself. The dancing student didn't plan his creative expression. He simply allowed sufficient space for something genuine to emerge, rather than rushing to fill the conversational gap with standard phrases. Tonight, as you reflect on your own patterns of communication, can you imagine treating casual questions as opportunities for authentic expression, rather than obligations to provide expected answers? Perhaps you'll discover that even brief interactions can become gateways to greater self-awareness and more meaningful connection. As the Buddha observed, the tongue, like a sharp knife, kills without drawing blood. But the tongue can also heal, connect, and awaken when guided by presence rather than habit. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the universality of loss and the path from isolation to understanding. This is the tale of a mother, her grief, and the Buddha's compassionate wisdom. In a small village where life moves according to ancient rhythms of birth, growth, harvest, and death, a young mother experiences the most devastating loss imaginable. Her child, barely old enough to walk and speak his first words, falls victim to a sudden illness that takes him before any remedy can be found. In a single night, her world transforms from the joy of nurturing new life to the incomprehensible reality of holding her son's lifeless body. Driven by desperation and the fierce love that refuses to accept finality, the mother wraps her child carefully and sets out for the place where the Buddha is known to teach. She has heard stories of his great compassion and miraculous wisdom. Surely, if anyone possesses the power to undo this terrible mistake of fate, it would be this enlightened being who understands the deepest mysteries of existence. She finds the Buddha seated beneath a great tree, surrounded by disciples and villagers who have come seeking guidance. Without ceremony, she approaches and gently places her deceased child at his feet. Her voice, hoarse with grief yet firm with determined hope, carries across the gathered assembly. "Please, Lord Buddha," she pleads, "bring my son back to life. He is everything I have in this world. Without him, my existence has no meaning. I know that your compassion is limitless and your power beyond ordinary understanding. Please, restore my child to me." The Buddha regards her with infinite tenderness, seeing not just her individual suffering, but the universal human condition that she represents. His response carries no trace of dismissal or false consolation, yet neither does it offer the miracle she seeks. "I will help you," he says gently, "but first you must do something for me. Go throughout your village and the surrounding communities. Bring me a single mustard seed, but it must come from a household where no one has ever died. When you return with such a seed, I will restore your son's life." Hope rekindled, the mother carefully lifts her child and begins her search with renewed energy. Mustard seeds are common, surely finding one should be simple. She approaches the first house she encounters, and the family immediately offers to help, reaching for their supply of seeds. "Wait," she stops them, remembering the Buddha's condition. "Has anyone in your household ever died?" The family exchanges glances filled with their own memories of loss. "Oh yes," they reply softly. "We lost our grandmother just 2 years ago, and before that, my brother died in an accident." Their faces show understanding as they realize why she asks, and they cannot provide what she seeks. House after house yields the same pattern. Each family gladly offers mustard seeds, but when she explains the requirement, each must acknowledge their own encounters with death. Parents speak of children lost to disease. Children remember grandparents who have passed. Some households carry recent grief, others older losses, but none have been untouched by mortality's reality. As the day progresses and her search expands to neighboring villages, the mother begins to see her situation from an expanding perspective. In every home, she finds not just willingness to help, but recognition of shared experience. Other mothers have held lifeless children. Other families have struggled with incomprehensible loss. Her agony, while intensely personal, is also universally human. By evening, she has not found a single household that death has never visited. But more importantly, she has found something else. The recognition that suffering, while painful, connects us to the fundamental condition of all living beings, rather than separating us from them. She returns to the Buddha, no longer carrying desperate demands for miraculous intervention, but seeking a different kind of help. Her son's body rests peacefully in her arms, but her relationship to his death has transformed. She bows deeply and says, "Lord Buddha, I understand now. Please teach me about the nature of life and death. Help me find a way to honor my love for my son while learning to live with this loss." Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. The deeper teaching here shows us that acknowledging the universality of loss can transform isolation into connection and despair into wisdom. Why do we feel so alone when confronted with death and loss, when these experiences are among the most universal aspects of human existence? Buddhist psychology reveals that suffering often compounds itself by creating the illusion that our pain is uniquely unbearable, that others couldn't possibly understand our particular anguish, that we've been singled out for especially cruel treatment by fate. This sense of isolation intensifies grief by cutting us off from the very connections that could provide healing. When we believe our suffering is unprecedented, we resist the comfort and wisdom available from others who have walked similar paths. We push away exactly what we most need, the recognition that love and loss are inseparable throughout human experience. The Buddha's compassionate strategy didn't minimize the mother's grief or rush her toward acceptance. Instead, he guided her toward a direct discovery that would transform her understanding organically. By requiring her to visit household after household, he ensured she would encounter the full spectrum of human loss, while also witnessing how families continue living meaningful lives despite experiencing tragedy. This search served as a form of healing meditation in action. Each conversation with bereaved families became an opportunity for the mother to see her experience reflected in others' stories. Each expression of sympathy from people who recognized her pain created threads of connection that began weaving her back into the fabric of community. The mustard seed itself carries symbolic significance. It's one of the smallest seeds, yet it grows into a substantial plant. This suggests that even tiny acknowledgements of our shared vulnerability can grow into profound understanding and acceptance. The impossible condition the Buddha set wasn't meant to frustrate her, but to lead her toward a different kind of miracle: the transformation of isolated suffering into connected wisdom. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about the wisdom of no escape, the recognition that attempting to avoid life's inevitable difficulties creates additional suffering beyond the original pain. The mother's initial request represented this very human desire to escape from loss rather than learn how to be with it skillfully. The story also reveals how grief can become a gateway to deeper understanding when met with wisdom rather than denial. The mother's love for her child didn't diminish through accepting his death. Instead, it found a way to honor their connection while acknowledging the temporary nature of all physical forms. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice called taking and giving, where practitioners deliberately contemplate the suffering of others as a way of developing compassion and perspective. The mother's journey inadvertently became such a practice as she discovered that every family carried losses similar to her own. This doesn't mean that individual grief should be minimized or quickly moved through. The particularity of each loss, the specific person, relationship, dreams that have ended, deserves full acknowledgement. But recognizing the universality of loss can prevent grief from becoming a prison that isolates us from life's continuing flow. The Buddha's guidance points toward what might be called grief with company, rather than grief alone. When we understand that millions of parents have loved children who died, that loss is woven into the very structure of existence. Our pain becomes no less real, but somehow more bearable, because it's shared. This story also addresses the natural human tendency to bargain with reality, to seek exceptions to universal laws through spiritual intervention. The mother's request for resurrection reflects our deep resistance to accepting that some changes cannot be undone, that some losses cannot be reversed through sufficient faith, love, or spiritual authority. Instead of resurrection, the Buddha offered something potentially more valuable, a path toward wisdom that could transform her relationship to loss itself. This represents spiritual teaching at its most skillful, meeting people exactly where they are while guiding them toward deeper understanding. The teaching doesn't end with accepting death's inevitability, but points toward how this acceptance can become a foundation for more authentic living. When we truly integrate the reality of impermanence, our remaining time becomes more precious, our relationships more genuine, our priorities clearer. Tonight, as you reflect on the losses you've experienced or fear experiencing, can you sense the vast company of others who have walked similar paths? Perhaps you'll discover that your deepest pain, rather than separating you from others, connects you to the fundamental human experience of loving what cannot last forever. As the Buddha taught, of all things that arise and pass away, loving awareness alone remains constant. This awareness can hold both our love and our loss with equal tenderness. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fluid nature of circumstances and the wisdom of withholding judgment. This is the tale of an old farmer and the art of living with uncertainty. In a remote valley surrounded by rolling mountains, an elderly farmer lives with his adult son in a simple farmhouse that has sheltered their family for generations. Their life is modest but sufficient, sustained by a small plot of vegetables and their most valuable possession, a strong, reliable horse that helps with all the heavy work of farming and transportation. One morning, the farmer awakens to discover that the horse has disappeared during the night. The gate stands open, and there are no tracks indicating theft. The animal has simply wandered off into the vast wilderness beyond their valley. For a farming family, losing their only horse represents a catastrophic setback that threatens their livelihood and survival. Word of this misfortune spreads quickly through their small community. By afternoon, neighbors begin arriving to express their sympathy and support. "Oh, how terrible this is for you," they exclaim with genuine concern. "What dreadful luck! How will you manage the farm without your horse? This is truly a disaster." The old farmer listens to their well-meaning condolences with calm attention, then responds simply, "How do you know this is bad luck?" His neighbors exchange puzzled glances. Surely the loss of such an essential animal is obviously unfortunate. But the old man's serene expression reveals no trace of the distress they expect to see. He continues with his daily activities as if nothing particularly significant has occurred. The next morning brings an extraordinary development. The missing horse returns, not alone, but followed by a small herd of wild horses, magnificent, powerful animals that have chosen to follow the domestic horse back to the farm. The farmer and his son quickly construct temporary fencing to contain this unexpected windfall. The same neighbors who had offered sympathy now rush over to share in the celebration. "What incredible good fortune," they declare with excitement. "You've gone from having one horse to owning an entire herd. This is the best luck anyone could imagine. You must be overjoyed by this blessing." Again, the old farmer listens thoughtfully to their enthusiastic congratulations before responding with the same calm curiosity. "How do you know this is good luck?" The following day, the farmer's son attempts to break one of the wild horses for riding. These animals, though beautiful, have never known human handling and resist fiercely. During the training session, the young man is thrown violently from the horse's back and suffers a severe break in his leg that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. Once more, the neighbors gather to offer their support in what appears to be another turn toward misfortune. "How dreadful," they lament, shaking their heads at this latest setback. "Just when things were looking so positive, this terrible accident happens. Your poor son. What bad luck has befallen your family again?" The old farmer tends to his son's injury with gentle care while responding to their expressions of sympathy with familiar words. How do you know this is bad luck? Within days, their question finds an unexpected answer. Military officers arrive in the valley with orders to conscript all able-bodied young men for a dangerous war against northern invaders. Most of these soldiers will not return home alive. However, when they examine the farmer's son, his broken leg makes him unsuitable for military service. He remains safely at home while other families say goodbye to their children, perhaps forever. The Buddha taught, every blessing ignored becomes a curse. Every curse faced becomes a blessing. What emerges from this story is the profound wisdom of holding our judgments about circumstances lightly, recognizing that our perspective is always partial and temporary. Why do we rush to label experiences as fortunate or unfortunate when their ultimate meaning remains unknown? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds seek the comfort of quick categorization, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. We want to know immediately whether to celebrate or mourn, to relax or worry, to feel grateful or resentful. This mental habit of instant evaluation reflects a deeper pattern of trying to control our emotional responses by controlling our interpretations of events. If we can quickly determine that something is good or bad, we believe we know how to feel and what to expect. This provides temporary psychological relief, but often proves premature and misleading. The old farmer's repeated question, "How do you know?" points to what Buddhist philosophy calls "don't know mind." This isn't ignorance, but wisdom, the recognition that reality unfolds in ways too complex and interconnected for our limited perspective to fully comprehend. What appears devastating in the moment may prove beneficial over time, while apparent blessings may carry hidden difficulties. Consider how many experiences in your own life have changed meaning as their consequences became clear. Perhaps a job rejection led to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending created space for personal growth. Possibly an illness brought unexpected insights about what truly matters. The disappointment you felt at the time now seems misplaced given what followed. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or stop having natural responses to events. The farmer certainly wanted his horse back and felt concern for his son's injury, but he distinguished between acknowledging immediate circumstances and creating elaborate stories about their ultimate significance. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught about beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh openness rather than predetermined assumptions about its meaning. When we practice this kind of mental flexibility, we become more resilient and responsive to changing conditions rather than rigid and reactive. The art of living that this story illustrates involves developing what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain present and responsive regardless of whether circumstances align with our preferences. This isn't passive resignation, but dynamic engagement without attachment to specific outcomes. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the experience instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means for our future happiness or security. When we can rest in not knowing, we often discover that our wisdom about how to respond emerges naturally from the situation itself. The farmer's approach also demonstrates tremendous faith, not in specific outcomes, but in the fundamental trustworthiness of life's process. He acts skillfully with whatever arises while remaining open to possibilities beyond his current understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on recent events you've labeled as fortunate or unfortunate, can you hold those judgments more lightly? Perhaps you'll discover that your peace of mind depends less on having good luck and more on developing the capacity to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. As the Buddha observed, everything changes. Nothing remains without change. This includes our interpretations of whether those changes serve our deepest welfare. Let us explore a story that takes place in a tranquil temple nestled in the northern mountains of Japan, where autumn painted the world in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. This is the story of a garden and a Zen master. The crisp autumn air carries the sound of rustling leaves as a senior monk moves methodically through the temple courtyard. With careful precision, he gathers the fallen leaves beneath the ancient maple tree that has watched over this sacred space for centuries. Each sweep of his bamboo rake creates perfect lines in the gravel, and soon he has assembled a magnificent pile of leaves, their colors still vibrant despite their journey to the earth. The monk works with quiet satisfaction, placing the leaves carefully into woven baskets, his movements graceful and purposeful. From beyond the temple wall, another figure watches this scene unfold. A Zen master from a neighboring monastery observes the monk's diligent work, his weathered face thoughtful. When the senior monk notices his presence and waves proudly toward his immaculate garden, calling out cheerfully, "It is good, isn't it?" The Zen master simply nods and says, "Just about. Wait a moment, I'm coming over." The senior monk watches curiously as the Zen master enters through the wooden gate, walks directly to the ancient tree, and without ceremony gives its trunk a vigorous shake. Immediately, countless leaves cascade down like golden rain, covering the pristine garden once again in nature's beautiful disorder. The Zen master dusts off his hands and says simply, "Now it is good," before departing as quietly as he arrived. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound teaching about attachment to outcomes and the ego's need for completion. Why do we become so invested in finished results, in tidy conclusions, in maintaining the illusion of control over impermanence? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that trap us in outcome obsession. We often measure our worth by external achievements, rather than the quality of presence we bring to each action. The senior monk had moved from mindful raking to prideful display, from being present with the process to identifying with the product. Consider how often throughout your day you rush through activities simply to reach their completion. Washing dishes becomes about having clean dishes rather than the warm water on your hands. Exercise becomes about burning calories rather than feeling your body move. Meditation becomes about achieving peace rather than witnessing whatever arises. In each case, we sacrifice the richness of the present moment for an imagined future satisfaction. Zen Master Dogen taught, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This seeming paradox points to the delicate balance between accepting what is while remaining open to continuous becoming. The garden was perfect in its autumn disorder, and it was also perfect in its temporary tidiness. Both states were fleeting expressions of natural flow. The deeper teaching here shows us that true spiritual practice lies not in achieving permanent states, but in developing the capacity to engage wholeheartedly with whatever work is before us. Whether gathering leaves or watching them fall, the quality of our attention matters more than the condition of our garden. When we cling to outcomes, we miss the sacred nature of process itself. This ancient wisdom challenges our productivity-obsessed culture that values completion over presence. What if the purpose of raking leaves isn't to have a tidy garden, but to practice wholehearted engagement with impermanence? What if the point of any spiritual practice isn't to achieve enlightenment, but to show up fully for this unrepeatable moment? Tonight, as you notice your attachment to having things finished, organized, or resolved, can you pause and appreciate the beauty of incompletion? Perhaps you'll discover that the most profound satisfaction comes not from achieving perfect results, but from offering perfect attention to whatever is arising now. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When we think we must control outcomes, we become anxious controllers. When we trust the wisdom of process, we become participants in life's deeper rhythms. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get. So I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen Master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change. Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down." When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now, and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Let us now turn to a story about the most profound spiritual truth hiding in the most obvious place. This is the dialogue between Joshu and Nansen about the ordinary mind. In a quiet mountain monastery where morning mist drifted between ancient pine trees and the sound of temple bells echoed across distant valleys, two masters engaged in a conversation that would illuminate the very heart of Zen understanding. Joshu, despite his own considerable wisdom and years of practice, approached his teacher Nansen with the earnestness of a sincere student seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence. The two men sat facing each other in the temple's meditation hall, where countless seekers before them had wrestled with the same fundamental questions about the nature of awakening. Joshu's inquiry came from a place of genuine perplexity. After years of intensive practice, meditation, and study, he still felt uncertain about the very foundation of the spiritual path. "Master," Joshu began with characteristic directness, "what exactly is the way? With all our practices and teachings, what are we ultimately seeking?" Nansen's response was immediate and surprisingly simple. "Ordinary mind is the way," he replied, as if stating the most obvious fact in the world. This answer clearly puzzled Joshu, who had expected something more esoteric, more complex, more removed from everyday experience. "If ordinary mind is the way," he pressed further, "then should we direct ourselves toward cultivating it? Should we make it our spiritual goal?" Nansen shook his head gently. "If you direct yourself toward it, you immediately go away from it," he explained. "The very effort to attain ordinary mind makes it extraordinary, and therefore no longer ordinary." Now Joshu found himself in what seemed like an impossible logical bind. "But Master, if we don't try to cultivate or attain anything, how can we ever know that this ordinary mind is actually the way? How can we recognize it without some form of practice or effort?" Nansen's final response cut through all philosophical complexity with razor-sharp clarity. "The way does not belong to knowing or not knowing. Knowing turns the way into a concept, an object of understanding, which is illusion. Not knowing turns it into blankness, which misses its vibrant presence. If you truly realize the way without doubt, it becomes like the great void, so vast and boundless that it contains everything. How then could there be any distinction between right and wrong, sacred and mundane, ordinary and extraordinary?" At these words, something shifted fundamentally in Joshu's understanding. The seeking mind that had been grasping for answers suddenly relaxed, and he experienced a moment of complete clarity. Not the clarity of understanding something new, but the clarity of recognizing what had been present all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, there is nothing to seek and nothing to find. Everything is already here. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that what we seek through spiritual practice is not some special state of consciousness, but rather the ordinary awareness that is reading these words right now. Why do we struggle to accept that ordinary mind is the way? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that spiritual truth must be extraordinary, mystical, or dramatically different from our everyday experience. We imagine enlightenment as a permanent state of bliss, cosmic consciousness, or supernatural abilities, when in reality, it is simply the natural state of awareness without the overlay of seeking and striving. Our spiritual seeking often becomes its own obstacle. Like a person frantically searching for glasses while wearing them, we exhaust ourselves looking for something we already possess. The very effort to attain a special spiritual state creates the sense of separation between seeker and sought, between the ordinary self and some idealized, awakened self. Consider how your own mind works in this very moment. Thoughts arise and pass away. Sensations appear in your body, sounds reach your ears, emotions flow through your awareness. This natural functioning of consciousness, without any special effort or concentration, is what Nansen calls ordinary mind. It is already enlightened, not because it achieves some particular state, but because it is the very space in which all states appear and dissolve. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way, just like now, without seeking anything, without grasping after the fruits of Zen, just this mind that thinks and feels and perceives. This is Buddha." This ordinariness is precisely what makes it so difficult to recognize. We keep looking past it for something more impressive. The great void that Nansen mentions is not empty space, but rather the spacious awareness in which all experiences arise. Like the sky that remains unchanged whether filled with clouds or clear, this awareness remains constant through all the changing contents of experience. Joy and sorrow, clarity and confusion, peace and agitation, all appear and disappear within this unchanging background of ordinary awareness. This understanding revolutionizes our approach to spiritual practice. Instead of trying to achieve some special state, we learn to recognize the awareness that is already present. Instead of seeking to transcend ordinary experience, we discover the extraordinary nature of ordinariness itself. The sound of rain becomes as sacred as temple bells. Washing dishes becomes as profound as formal meditation. In Japanese aesthetics, there is a concept called wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. This appreciation for the ordinary and imperfect reflects the same understanding that Nansen points toward. The way is not found in perfected states, but in the natural flow of life exactly as it is. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the sounds around you, can you recognize this ordinary awareness as what you have been seeking all along? Can you relax the effort to become something other than what you already are? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The way is not a destination to reach, but the very ground you are already standing on. In accepting your ordinary mind as Buddha mind, you discover that the spiritual journey was never about going somewhere else, but about recognizing where you have always been. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake, where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow?" The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of." "Squint," said the teacher patiently. "That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven." The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, Can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a swollen river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they encountered a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and treacherous, filled with debris from the mountain runoff, and she was clearly afraid to attempt crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential complications of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began formulating explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for alternative solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's predicament and the genuine danger she faced, and made a different choice. Without hesitation or lengthy deliberation, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the treacherous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the atmosphere between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, his internal tension grew until finally he could no longer contain his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so blatantly violate our sacred vows?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between compassionate action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenarios and nursing grievances that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's agitation demonstrates how rigid adherence to rules can sometimes conflict with the compassionate spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurse old grievances, or mentally rehearse scenarios that have already ended? How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing was impermanent. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who maintained perfect rule observance created hours of agitation for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the difference between resistance and flow. This is the teaching of the old man and the waterfall. In a mountain village where a swift river carved its way through ancient rocks, an old Taoist sage often walked along the water's edge, observing the interplay between the flowing current and the solid stones that tried to redirect its path. The villagers knew him as a gentle, contemplative man who seemed to understand something profound about the natural world that others missed. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the river swelled with unusual force. The current grew violent and unpredictable, rushing toward a high waterfall that dropped into a rocky gorge below. Most people avoided the area during such conditions, knowing that anyone who fell into the rapids would face almost certain death against the jagged rocks at the bottom of the falls. The old man, however, had been caught by the sudden storm while walking along his usual path. As he tried to make his way back to safety, the muddy bank gave way beneath his feet. Before he could catch himself, he tumbled into the raging torrent and was immediately swept away by the powerful current. Villagers who witnessed his fall cried out in horror. They ran along the riverbank, helplessly watching as the old man was carried toward the waterfall by waters too violent and swift for any rescue attempt. They could only watch in anguish as he disappeared over the edge, plunging into the churning chaos below. Everyone assumed the worst. No one could survive such a fall, especially not an elderly man with limited strength. The villagers prepared themselves to search for his body downstream, once the waters calmed enough to make such a search possible. But to their amazement, as they hurried toward the base of the waterfall, they saw the old man emerging from the water far below, completely unharmed. He walked calmly to the shore, water streaming from his clothes, and sat down to rest as peacefully as if he had simply taken a refreshing swim on a pleasant day. The villagers rushed to him, unable to believe what they had witnessed. "How is this possible?" they asked in wonder. "How did you survive that terrible fall? The water was so violent, the rocks so dangerous. By all reason, you should have been killed." The old man smiled at their concern and amazement. He wrung water from his sleeves and considered their question carefully before answering. "I survived," he said simply, "because I accommodated myself to the water, not the water to me. When I felt myself falling, I did not fight against the current or try to force it to change direction. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. When the water wanted to go down, I went down. When it swirled, I swirled with it. Plunging into the whirlpool, I came out with the whirlpool. I became like the water itself, and this is how I survived." The villagers listened in silence, beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more than a fortunate accident. They had seen a demonstration of a profound principle that the old man had spent years learning from his careful observation of the natural world. As the Buddha taught, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. Here we discover the wisdom of working with life's currents, rather than exhausting ourselves in futile resistance to forces beyond our control. Why do we instinctively fight against difficult circumstances when flow and adaptation might serve us better? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind believes it can control external conditions through force of will. But this approach often creates more suffering than the original difficulty. The old man's survival wasn't mere luck. It was the result of understanding something essential about the nature of existence itself. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of events, rather than demanding that life conform to our preferences, we often discover resources and possibilities that resistance makes invisible. Consider your own relationship with challenging circumstances. How much energy do you spend fighting against situations you cannot change? The old man's teaching suggests a different approach, not passive submission, but conscious adaptation that maintains our essential nature while flowing with changing conditions. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations or abandoning our values. The old man didn't give up his desire to survive. He simply changed his strategy for survival. Instead of fighting the water's power, he used it. Instead of resisting its direction, he moved with it while maintaining his awareness and intention. In relationships, careers, and personal challenges, we often face similar choices. We can exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes, control other people's behavior, or make external circumstances conform to our expectations. Or we can learn to work skillfully with what is actually present, finding creative ways to achieve our deeper purposes through accommodation rather than force. Zen master Lao Tzu taught, water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which cannot yield and is destroyed. The old man embodied this teaching, demonstrating that apparent weakness can be a source of tremendous strength when applied with wisdom. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This principle extends beyond hatred to all forms of resistance. Problems are rarely solved by fighting against them directly, but by understanding their nature and finding ways to work with the underlying forces involved. Look deeply at a current source of stress or conflict in your life. Where are you trying to force the water to change direction rather than learning to swim with it? What would it mean to accommodate yourself to the situation while maintaining your essential values and intentions? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable currents of daily life, unexpected changes, difficult people, circumstances beyond your control, can you remember the old man's wisdom? Can you find ways to maintain your center while flowing with forces you cannot change, discovering that sometimes the most direct path to your goals is the one that appears to go around obstacles rather than through them? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to flow with life's currents is ultimately about letting go of our need to control everything while maintaining our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. Like water, we can be both powerful and yielding, both persistent and adaptive, both strong and gentle. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distractions started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time, the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. He realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. "Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier?" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushige sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master. His anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Tonight, as we gently draw our time together to a close, can you feel how the calm that settled over you isn't something you had to create or chase, but rather something you simply allowed to emerge? Can you sense that the deep understanding you've touched through these stories isn't separate from who you are, but has been quietly waiting within your own awareness all along? The Buddha reminded us, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. As you reflect on this wisdom, notice that the tranquility and insight you're experiencing right now don't require perfect conditions or endless effort, but naturally arise when you simply allow yourself to be fully here, fully present. Throughout our journey tonight, each timeless tale has revealed the same fundamental truth from different angles. That struggle diminishes when we stop fighting what is. That freedom comes naturally when we release our need to control. And that lasting peace emerges when we see through the stories our minds tell us about how things should be. Even when challenges return tomorrow, even when your thoughts start racing again, the understanding you've absorbed tonight has taken root in your consciousness, ready to guide you back to this place of clarity whenever you need it. These stories remind us that profound wisdom isn't hidden in distant monasteries or complex philosophies. It lives right here in the gentle awareness that notices your breath, that feels your heartbeat, that simply observes without judgment. Tonight, you've tasted that truth, a truth that becomes clear whenever we pause our endless doing and simply allow ourselves to be. As you transition from this peaceful space back into your daily life, take with you not just the stories themselves, but the deep calm and clarity they've awakened in you. May this understanding stay close, lighting your way through whatever tomorrow brings, reminding you that peace is always just one conscious breath away. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.